The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus.
These new findings shining an even brighter light onto our past.
We've been uncovering amazing remains of a Byzantine church complex. The church covers an area of about 1.5 dunums.
It began, as so many of the great biblical archaeology debates do, with a simple limestone box, about 1/2 meter long and 30 centimeters high. Weathered and scarred by centuries of time, it hardly looked like the sort of object that could set the world of religion, history, and scholarship ablaze. Yet inscribed across its surface were words that, if authentic, would amount to one of the most startling archaeological links to the New Testament ever discovered. The box itself, known as an ossuary, was a container for bones used by Jewish families in the 1st century. After a body was laid in a tomb and allowed to decompose, the bones were collected, placed into an ossuary, and often labeled with the name of the deceased. Most bore simple identifiers, a name, occasionally a father's name, and in rare cases a note about family lineage. This one, however, went further. Its Aramaic inscription read, Yaakov bar Yosef, Akui de Yeshua, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. The words are plain, but their implications are staggering. If genuine, this humble stone box once held the bones of James the Just, the leader of the early Jerusalem church, and, most explosively, the brother of Jesus of Nazareth himself. For centuries, scholars and theologians debated whether the biblical references to Jesus' brothers were literal or figurative. Some traditions held they were cousins, others suggested half-brothers, and still others saw the term as symbolic of spiritual kinship. Yet here was an inscription carving the relationship into stone. James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Few ossuaries ever mention siblings at all, and when they do, it is almost always because the brother was a figure of great fame. Out of the hundreds unearthed, only one other from the period references a brother, and in that case it was tied to a man known for supplying sacrificial animals to the temple. The rarity of such phrasing, combined with the fame of the Jesus named here, was what made scholars lean in and ordinary people marvel. Could this really be proof that Jesus not only lived, but had a family whose existence was marked in stone? Yet from the moment the ossuary came to light, authenticity became the great battlefield. The story began in October 2002 when the ossuary's existence was announced at a Washington, D.C. press conference hosted by the Biblical Archaeology Society and co-sponsored by the Discovery Channel. It belonged to Oded Golan, an Israeli engineer and antiquities collector who had purchased it years earlier on the antiquities market. The announcement caused a sensation. Here, it was said, was the first physical artifact tied directly to Jesus of Nazareth. The box was rushed into exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, where it drew crowds and headlines, and where, unfortunately, it was damaged in transit and broke into several pieces. That accident, however, gave experts the rare chance to examine the inscription more closely than they otherwise would have. Almost immediately, though, the Israel Antiquities Authority convened a committee of scholars who declared the inscription a modern forgery. Their argument hinged on the idea that the first part of the inscription, James, son of Joseph, was authentic, but that the phrase brother of Jesus had been added centuries later by a forger hoping to inflate its value. Critics pointed out differences in the style of lettering, depth of carving, and clarity between the two halves. To them, this was a clear sign that someone had meddled with the ossuary in modern times. Within a year, Golan found himself charged with dozens of counts of forgery and fraud, accused of running an entire operation that manufactured fake biblical artifacts for profit. For the skeptics, the James ossuary became Exhibit A in a case of antiquities deception. But the story refused to be so simple. Even as the IAA denounced the artifact, some of the world's leading epigraphers insisted it was genuine. André Lemaire of the Sorbonne, who first examined the ossuary, attested that the entire inscription was consistent with 1st century Aramaic scripts. Ada Yardeni, one of the most respected experts in Hebrew and Aramaic epigraphy, went so far as to say that if the inscription was a forgery, she would quit the field altogether. Emile Puech of the École Biblique in Jerusalem joined them in supporting its authenticity. They argued that both halves of the inscription mix formal and cursive script in ways known from other ossuaries, that the supposed two-hand theory was based on superficial differences exaggerated by over-cleaning, and that ancient patina could be found inside the grooves of all 5 words. The Royal Ontario Museum's own curator supported this defense. During the repair process after the break, they noticed that parts of the inscription looked sharper only because they had been aggressively cleaned with a sharp tool, which removed patina from the letters. The end of the inscription, which had not been cleaned, retained a softer, more encrusted look. This was not evidence of forgery, they argued, but evidence of clumsy restoration. Later studies went even further. A 2014 analysis published in the Open Journal of Geology identified ancient microfossils, quartz, and windblown materials embedded in the patina across both parts of the inscription. These inclusions, impossible to fake without impossibly advanced technology, indicated that the letters were as ancient as the box itself. Under cross-examination during the trial, Yuval Goren, one of the leading critics, admitted he had seen traces of ancient patina even in the word Yeshua. Then came the photographs. As Golan stood accused of fabricating the inscription sometime around the year 2000, his defense team produced photographs of his apartment from the 1970s that showed the ossuary already in his possession, inscription, and all. An ex-girlfriend had snapped a picture of his bookshelf in 1976, and there it was, alongside a phone book dated to that year. Forensic experts, including a former FBI photographic analyst, confirmed the age of the photo paper. If the inscription was already present in the 1970s, then the charge that Golan had concocted it in recent decades collapsed. The trial, which dragged on for 7 years, ended in 2012 with Golan acquitted of all forgery charges. The judge stressed that the ruling did not prove the ossuary authentic, only that the prosecution had failed to prove it was fake beyond reasonable doubt. Yet the acquittal was a turning point. The ossuary returned to Golan, and the debate shifted from the courtroom back to the world of scholarship. Since then, wave after wave of studies have bolstered the case for authenticity. Scholars have shown that the inscription's script matches that of the 1st century, that patina fills even the deepest grooves of the word Jesus, and that the geological and chemical makeup of the inscription matches the rest of the box. Scott Stripling, a biblical archaeologist, remarked in 2022 that most scholars now accept the ossuary as genuine, comparing it to other discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Tel Dan inscription, which also faced initial skepticism. Even critics concede that if it is a forgery, it is a forgery of such sophistication that it would have had to be executed decades before modern forgery techniques existed. Still, the problem of context lingers. The ossuary was not unearthed in a controlled excavation. It was purchased on the antiquities market, its tomb unknown, its chain of custody murky. That fact alone makes many scholars cautious. Without provenance, it will never escape a cloud of doubt. Yet history is full of artifacts that emerged from the market rather than the shovel. The first Dead Sea Scrolls were purchased from Bedouin shepherds, not dug up by archaeologists. The Hezekiah Bulla first appeared in collectors' hands before being matched with finds in situ. Authentic artifacts can and do surface this way. The question is always whether the evidence tips the scale toward authenticity. And in this case, the statistical odds themselves are striking. James, Joseph, and Jesus were indeed common names in the 1st century. Some argue this weakens the case. After all, what are the chances that this particular trio refers to the biblical family? Yet statisticians have calculated that the combination is extraordinarily rare. Professor Camille Fuchs of Tel Aviv University concluded that only around 1.7 men in Jerusalem at the time could reasonably have been named James, son of Joseph, with a brother named Jesus. Add to that the extraordinary rarity of mentioning a brother at all, and the odds lean toward this being the James, the leader of the Jerusalem church executed in the year 62, whom Josephus the historian also describes as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. And so the limestone box sits, weathered and worn, its rosettes faint, its inscription debated, its authenticity championed and denied in equal measure. It is, in its way, a mirror of the very story it touches. A story of faith and doubt, of disciples and skeptics, of a man named Jesus, whose life continues to divide and unite. Perhaps that is why the James ossuary captivates us still. For in its simple words, scratched into stone 2,000 years ago, we glimpse not just the possibility of proof, but the enduring mystery of belief itself.